The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the first in a series of GTMA webinars we have titled as our Legends series. My name is Rob Dingus. I'm the president of the Geospatial Transportation Mapping Association. The focus of these webinars is to provide some of the greats in the transportation field a platform from which they can provide what academics would refer to as a last lecture. We'd like to thank those of you who have registered for today's webinar. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. Simply click on the questions icon and type in your questions. The transportation field is losing a generation of leaders to retirement. The Legends series gives us an opportunity to capture some of their final thoughts. We will be posting these presentations on the GTMA YouTube channel and sending out links so that others may share today's presentation with colleagues. We are pleased to have today's speaker to kick off this series. Butch Wlaschin became the director of the Federal Highway Office of Asset Management, Pavements, and Construction in 2007. Until his recent retirement, Butch led a team of engineers and transportation specialists in developing policy, guidance, and technical assistance for state and local transportation officials. Most recently, he was intimately involved in developing the Asset Management Proposed Rule to implement requirements found in the Federal Surface Transportation Law, MAP 21. He holds an MSCE in Geotechnical Engineering from Georgia Tech and a BSCE from Lamar University. He's a life member of ASCE and a registered professional engineer. During his 42 years of service in the transportation arena, Butch has worked to assist state and local agency professionals improve the way assets are managed and understood. I am pleased to now turn the time over to Butch Wlaschin. It's all yours, Butch.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about asset management today and some of the requirements that I see coming forth. Please be aware that Federal Highway and the U.S. DOT are proceeding with a rulemaking process that is internal to that organization, and I will not be commenting directly about what they've been doing other than what my involvement might have been early on. So I do want to talk a little bit about asset management. I want to talk a little bit about the data requirements and how we could better use some of the data that we've been collecting for some time, and how we can meet these requirements, how we can use the data that we've been collecting, and how we can probably start getting the best bang for the dollar for the limited resource dollars that we have when it comes to managing our transportation assets. So I've got about a dozen, 18 slides altogether. And then at the end, as Rob said, we'd be more than happy to take any of your questions and hopefully have some sort of a dialogue about the concepts of asset management as I see them, and sort of try to answer questions that you may have pending in your organization or maybe just on your desktop alone. So here we go. Well, we got to figure out how to make this move. Let's try this. Stage that. Infrastructure condition. From day one, we've been probably, well, I say day one, but let's back up and say maybe for the last 50 or 60 years, we've been actively involved in building and expanding the nation's transportation system. With the inception of the interstate highway system in 1956 until its relative completion 50 years later, we've been working on designing, building, bridges, pavements, various types of infrastructure to facilitate the movement of goods and services and people across the country. But one of the things that we have not done as good a job and we've not spent as much time with has been maintaining that infrastructure asset condition in a state of good repair. And that's not to say that what we've done in maintenance or in operations hasn't been to focus on that, but it quite often gets left at the end of the day when we need more money to build a new bridge or more money to build a new roadway or more money to do something else. Maintenance gets sort of left behind, and it's not on the corporate table. We need to, and what I think the concept of asset management has been all about, is to move asset management, as Neil Peterson, the former head of the Maryland State Highway Administration, told me many years ago. We need to move asset management, the concepts, the ethic, the culture, out of maintenance and into that corporate office. It needs to be an ongoing dialogue right at the front, at the highest levels of the DOT. And that's what we need to be doing when we talk about infrastructure condition. The national challenge, certainly asset management. We're focusing on pavement and bridges. And in my mind, and what you'll hear from Steve Gay and Nostra and Sadatman, with those other people with Federal Highway, is that we need to be looking at the whole life of the pavement and the bridge. Quite often when we try to get the money to build a new facility, to design it and build it, we're talking about someplace in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% of the overall cost of that particular facility. If we spend $5 million to build the bridge, we probably need another 20, 30, $40 million over its life to just take good care of it. And it has to start on day one. It's not going to start 15 years from now when we've already lost some of our prized quality of that particular asset. We need to focus on risk management. You know, how far can we defer maintenance? How far can we defer taking care of the drainage that might affect the pavement? How far can we defer just putting things off? We're not going to resurface it. We're not going to recondition it. We're not going to rebuild it. How long can we do that? What is the risk to us today, to our future generations when it comes to doing those things? It needs to have some sort of a financial plan in our concepts of asset management. And when I say financial plan, I don't mean where does all the money come from to take care of it, but we need to figure out how much money do I need for this segment of the roadway, for this particular bridge, for this particular component of the bridge this year in 2014. How much money do we actually need in 2015? And I don't want some pie in the sky number out there. I need to actually have some valid numbers that maintenance, operations, the other people that have been doing it on an annual basis, I need to have their numbers tabulated and brought forward in a financial plan to say that this is the money that I need to take care of this roadway for 2015, 2016, 2017. And then corporately, senior management can then weigh in on a risk management plan to say, well, can we afford to do that? What can't we afford not to do? Can we move forward? Should we take another approach to it? Do we need to look at a different approach to taking care of that asset? Currently, the focus is on preservation, and that's all well and fine. We need to be able to look at investment strategies. You know, can I do resurfacing? If I'm already doing resurfacing on an 8 or a 10-year cycle, can I move that cycle out to 12 and 14? And what do I have to do to the pavement or the bridge in the meantime so that I can wait and do those resurfacing, redecking processes 8 to 10, 15 years out? What preservation activities, what maintenance activities can I do in the short term to extend the life so that I can get more bang for the dollar? We need to start using pavement and bridge management systems. Back in 1992, 95, in that time frame, federal laws required the establishment of pavement management and bridge management and safety management systems. There was a big pushback by the states and local governments to say, don't tell us how to do that, don't tell us what to do. And so the law was changed when we, by the 1997 federal funding requirements were published. But in the meantime, states have been doing it. They have been collecting the data to put together a pavement management system and a bridge management system. And now we're just trying to get people to use some of that data. The data has been collected. I've been across many, many states in the last several years. They're always proud to show me all of the data that they've collected. But when I start asking them, how are you using the data? How have you quantified the decisions that you've made in the past? What are you using the data for? Then we get a lot more blank stares coming back saying, well, we've been collecting the data, and we have to move forward beyond that. As I said in the last part of the slide, we need to move it, get that data in the chief engineers and the director's hands so they can look at it and say, this is what we've been doing and why it's successful, and this is where we need to spend a little bit more time and effort when it comes to using the data. Asset management is not a software system, excuse me, that we go to pick up at Best Buy or even for that matter of fact at AASHTO. It's basically a way of doing business. And that's what you need to hear. That's what we need to promote, is that it's changing the culture of the county engineer, the city engineer, the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Group. It's changing the culture of the state DOT. We're moving beyond maybe 90% design and construct and 10% operations and maintenance to maybe a 60 or 70 or 80% culture that says we're going to take care of what we own. And then, as time permits, as demand requires, we will expand the system. We will improve the system. But in the meantime, we have millions of miles of pavement. We have 600,000+ bridges out there. We need to change the way we're doing business. We need to focus on managing those assets. We need to document the process. When the federal law started being discussed that there would be an asset management requirement, I met with several of the state senior people around the country, and I said, okay, you are one of the leaders in asset management. Do you have a documented process? Time and time and time again, the answer was no. We have a process, we have a culture, but we don't really have it documented. We need to have a documented process. Asset management, over the years, I've been told, oh, we already do pavement management, we do bridge management. You know, our asset management system is really just maintenance management top to bottom. No, it's not. Those are systems that deal on the day-to-day basis of that particular asset. When it comes to asset management, we're talking about the culture of the agency. When we meet and we start talking about, let's build a new road from A to B, maybe the first question is, how are we doing with the rest of our assets? Are they in good condition? Are they going to start falling apart tomorrow? Are they going to fall apart in 5 years? Are they at the end of their valid, usable service life? Should we spend a little bit more money on those first before we move on to something new? And then once we get it out there, how are we using those pavement and bridge management systems? It's about managing the network over the whole life, from planning through disposal. And I know most highway engineers don't think about that, but we have to be thinking about, when we start planning this facility, how are we going to get the money to design and build it? What materials are we going to use? What construction techniques are we going to use? Who's going to be using the facility? How are we going to pay for it, to maintain it, to operate it for the next 50, 60, 70 years? And maybe in the terms of a bridge, over the next 100 years. How are we going to do that? Last year, I had an opportunity to go to Georgia Tech, and I made a presentation to a graduate class and to some of the seniors, and they said, well, there's no future in highways. It's already been built. And I had the opportunity to say, well, right outside the window here is the I-75-85 corridor in downtown Atlanta. And my challenge to those young men and women was that we're going to have to rebuild that freeway. It's nearing its end of its useful life. We're going to have to rebuild that freeway, and we need to do it under traffic. We don't have an opportunity to move hundreds of thousands of cars and trucks over onto the local city streets. We're going to do it under traffic. You're going to have to figure out ways to get in and get out effectively without impacting the traffic, without impacting daily life, without impacting movement of goods and service through the city of Atlanta. And we're going to have to come up with a system that's going to be durable and feasible for the next 15, 20, 30 years again. That challenge they had to take home. That challenge is what we need to get out of the university so that we can figure out how do we maintain that facility, how do we take care of it, how do we go about rebuilding it for the next generation that's out there. Clearly right now, the focus has to be on paving and bridges. That's where the money is. But in the long run, what about culverts? What about tunnels? What about guardrails, signs? What about all the ITS systems that we have out there? Montgomery County in Virginia or Maryland several years ago had a mainframe computer that controlled all their traffic signals go down. It was an obsolete piece of equipment. They didn't make them anymore, and they didn't have a plan for how to get it up and running. And so for several days there was a little bit of mass confusion while we tried to get them back online to get their ITS system, all the traffic signals back online. Where was the asset management of that? Where was the culture that says, you know, probably in the next 3 to 5, that system is going to go down, so let's have a backup plan out there ready to go. MAP 21 requirements. When the law was passed in July of 2012, it said that each state will be required to develop a risk-based asset management plan for the national highway system to improve or preserve the condition of those assets and the performance of the system. So at least at the federal level, there's a narrow focus. We want to focus on the national highway system. That's movement of goods and service. That's the defense highway system. That's getting product from the port to the consumer, from the farm to the port to get it to wherever it has to go. We want to narrowly focus, and we want to have an asset management plan, a risk-based asset management plan for that national highway system. States must address pavement and bridges, but they're encouraged to include all infrastructure assets within the highway right-of-way in their risk-based asset management plan. And just because of the size and enormity of collecting all that data, I would hope that between now and when the final rule gets promulgated by Federal Highway and U.S. DOT, that states and local governments focus primarily on paving and bridges. That's what we tried to push out, because if you can handle that part of it, you know, maybe over the next 3 to 5 years, you'll add high mass lights, or maybe you will add culverts, or maybe you will add some other critical asset that you've made determinations, or collaboratively we can make a determination. This is the next critical piece out there, and let's add that to the system. We don't have to go out there and say, oh my God, there are so many assets out there, I just can't collect them all. Let's narrowly focus so that when the rule comes out, that we can meet the intent of that rule, that we have an asset management plan, a risk-based asset management plan that covers pavements and bridges. If we can do that, then we have some time to figure out, well, what are the other critical assets? Which ones are most critical? Maybe it's your ITS system. Maybe it's the tunnels. Maybe it's high mass lights. And we'll move forward on that. You need to have, within that asset management plan, strategies that articulate really the culture and the philosophy of the state DOT or the county government that says, you know, we're going to have a philosophy and ethic that's going to say, first and foremost, we're going to take care of our assets. And I'm not downplaying the concept of safety, because safety is even bigger than maintaining the asset. But when it comes to, you know, the philosophy that says, oh, we're going to have a mobile society, or we're going to expand the system. What we really need to say is that within the means that we have, we're going to take care of the system that we have, and then as time allows, as funding allows, we will move on to other parts of that system. The asset management plan clearly has to include pavement and bridge, and that's what state DOTs are working on today as we speak. They're focusing on having a good, quantifiable, repeatable inventory and condition assessment of pavement and bridges. They need to talk about, and this is just common business practice sense, to say that there ought to be objectives and measures. You know, what are we trying to do? You know, we have 2,000 miles of pavement. Maybe the average life of that is 10, 12, 14 years. What are we doing to make it longer life? What are we doing to extend the life of the bridge? What are our objectives? What are those measures? We ought to look and try to figure out where is the pavement, where is the bridge, and the big picture of where is it in its lifetime, and what are we trying to do when it comes to facilitating closing that gap. We need to look at the whole life or the life cycle cost. We need to look at risk. What's the risk of not doing pavement preservation? What's the risk of not resealing the deck? What's the risk of not doing something when it comes to maintaining that particular asset? Your plan, according to what MAP 21 said, has to have that financial plan, and I've talked briefly about that. We need to have some sort of investment strategies, and I'm not looking for, I don't think Federal Highway is looking for where is the money coming from as your investment strategy. It's more like, what's the mix of fixes? How much can I spend on preservation? How much can I spend on maintenance? How much can I spend on resurfacing? How much can I spend on reconstruction? How much do I spend on building new? That ought to be your investment strategies and how we're moving those forward. Some risk examples, certainly funding. We always talk about funding. We talk about, you know, reputation of the agency. You know, oh my God, our bridges are falling down, and the public is going to lose faith in the highway department. But, you know, the one that I've highlighted on this particular place is data and data quality. There's lots and lots of data out there. We need to have repeatable data. If I go down the road and I say that this particular road seems to me to be in fairly good condition, I would hope that the motoring public can drive down that road, or the trucking industry can drive down that road and say, you know, this road is in pretty good condition. We need to have some factual data, repeatable data. We need to be able to use the data. And if I drive, like I said, if I drive down it or you drive down it, we ought to be able to come to the same conceptual idea that this road is in good, fair, or poor condition. We don't have a lot of definitions for what good, fair, and poor is. We've looked at some data coming out of TTI at Texas A&M, and we see that there are more than 50 different versions of describing a pavement as being good, fair, or poor. We need to be able to say that a poor road probably is a road that we can't do anything to it other than reconstruct it, that we have to, you know, rototill it up and put new pavement down. That's when it was getting to the point of being poor. It can't be acceptable or unacceptable, but what is poor? Do we have a good definition? Do we have the data to define that and be able to let the motoring public understand this road is poor, this one's fair, it's got a little bit more life to it, we're still fixing it now and then, and this one isn't good. It means that we're just taking care of it at minimal cost on an annual basis. How do we make this our business? We need to be able to preserve our assets and minimize their whole life costs. We need to, as we do with a car, as we do with a house, there ought to be things that we know that we have to set money aside for on an annual basis to preserve the car. We're going to change the oil every 3,000, 5,000, 6,000 miles. We are going to paint the sides of the house. We're going to seal the windows. We're going to repair the windows. We're going to do various things to that car in the house on an annual basis so that we can extend the life of that car. We need to be able to do that. That needs to be in our culture up front. We need to operate in a financially sustainable manner. We can't just keep borrowing on the future. We can't just keep saying, well, we're going to buy a new house every 10 or 15 years. We're going to buy a new car every 2 years so I don't have to worry about maintenance. That's not practical. That's not financially sustainable. You need to be able to think about how can I extend the life of that particular asset. We need to provide a framework, and that's what that asset management concept does to improve performance on a long-term basis. So when we say that the pavements are getting better, it's really based on that asset management plan. What was our investment strategies? What were the gaps that we were trying to fill? How are we trying to move the numbers forward? So we're taking some aggressive action over a long-term period of time. What should we be doing now? I would say that most of the people online, most of the people that we've talked to throughout the country over the last several years, you need to have a fundamental working knowledge of the requirements in MAP 21. It's in black and white. It says what you need to be doing. It says what you need to be thinking about. You need to have this framework, this culture, this philosophy of asset management in order to achieve performance measures that you've established down the pike that say, you know, this is where we're going to have the interstate highway system. This is where the NHS system is going to be. This is what we're going to do for our farm-to-market roads. This is what we're going to do for our bridges. This is the goals that we want to achieve in the long term, and are we making progress towards that? We certainly need a quantifiable, repeatable listing of pavement and bridge assets and their condition. And we need to have some consistency in how we do that, so that if I'm here in Delaware and I'm talking about the condition of my roads and bridges, there ought to be some basic understanding if I'm out in the middle of Nebraska and I want to talk about the condition of my pavement and bridges, that we're talking relatively about the same pavement types and pavement condition, understanding that there are regional differences out there. The management systems that I talked about earlier, pavement and bridge, they can no longer just be an inventory tool. They need to be a tool used not only at the pavement management group level, but also at the corporate level. When the senior managers are taking a look at their assets and they're saying, you know, the interstate seems to be maintaining its own. Okay, the pavement management system is working fine. Now, what about the next level of the roads? Is the pavement management system being able to maintain that? And it's an opportunity for the pavement management gurus and the bridge management gurus to make sure that their voice is being heard in the front office. Data quality, data management. Seems to me years ago that when I was collecting the data, I tried to go in and get additional funding to collect more data, but then I realized quickly that no one was really looking at the data except for me. And I needed to be able to move to that next level, to get people to look at the data. And as soon as I started getting the head of design, the head of bridge to look at the data, then they wanted quality data. They wanted more data. They wanted to know, was the data accurately articulating what was out there? Did it show me that the pavement was rutted? Did it show me that the pavement was at the end of its service life? Did it show me that bridges needed to have, excuse me, this type of an activity done, this type of maintenance, this type of preservation? Was I collecting the right data? When no one at that level was looking at the data, they didn't care. But once they started using the data, then it became extremely important, the quality of the data. Integrated data systems. It was interesting and sort of funny at a time in a way that when I started looking at the pavement data, looked at the long lat and tried to figure, okay, here's this road. Then I tried to superimpose bridges on top of that. You know, we had the National Bridge Inventory. States quite often would collect bridge inventory data, and I had access to that. And then I would use something like Google or Bing, and I'd look at the road and try to superimpose those roads and then superimpose the bridge on top of the roads. And I quickly realized that sometimes the data systems didn't match up. And so that I would have roads on the opposite side of the stream that was being shown on the road map. Or I'd have bridges that weren't located properly. In the long run, we need to be able to make that happen. And there are numerous systems out there that will help us take the existing data and use it so that it's all integrated. That makes the data more viable, more usable, more, you know, more public friendly, so that people can look and say, well, yes, that's the bridge. I know what they're doing on that bridge. Yes, the bridge is, oh, by the way, it's located exactly where it needs to be on the map, and the data is much better. You know, it's not like that when we start collecting the several million culverts out there that we're going to get them all exactly right, but the critical ones, it has to do with this roadway, or it has to do with this drainage. Is it in the right place? Is it the right size? Is the data the right data? So we need to make sure that it's integrated. There are ways of doing it. We don't have to start from scratch. We can move forward with that in a roundabout way. The second bullet talks about shared and common databases. Let the pavement people collect pavement data, and let the bridge people collect bridge data. But then let's share that data. Let's share that data with safety. Let's share that data with the planners. Let's share pavement data with the bridge people. You know, maybe we're getting ready to repave this particular road, and maybe it's an opportunity for the bridge people to know that we're coming down the road repaving, and it's an opportunity, a time in which to attack the bridge, to fix the bridge, to do some basic things on the bridge at the same time. I think we culturally think that it happens all the time that way, that the planners assume that it's all coordinated. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but we need to be able to get people to use that data, share the database, not have one central deposit where all the data is sitting there waiting for another asset management crisis to occur. Data management. States have plenty of data, but are not using it to make decisions at the corporate level. Over the last 18 months, I've been, along with my counterparts in Federal Highway, in a variety of state DOTs. And we would ask them, we're looking at your capital improvement plan for 2014, 15, 16, 17. We see that there are half a dozen bridges. There are some roadways in here. Is there a direct link to your pavement management system or your bridge management system? And I'm not kidding, but in almost every situation, there was a no given. That no, that data is used by the pavement people, or that data is used by the bridge people. And we'd ask, well, how did you decide that these were the bridges and pavements? Well, that comes from the district engineer or the regional engineer, or that comes from another analysis tool that we have out there. We need to make sure that the data that we're using, the data that we're talking about, is the same data. That if the chief engineer is talking about his pavements, that he's talking about the pavement data coming out of the pavement shop. If he's talking about bridge A, B, or C, and the condition of bridges A, B, or C, or some component of bridge A, B, or C, that it's the data that's being used by the bridge people, so that everybody's talking the same data. We need to be able to facilitate that. It's more critical as time goes forward. What can you do? What can we do today? I've said off and on during the presentation that I really do want us to focus on data quality. Once people start using the data, it's interesting how much better the quality will get. But in the meantime, we need to make sure we have quality data, that it's the best data that we can get moving forward, that it's timely, that it's repeatable, that it's something we can actually use. You know, maybe something silly like measuring the temperature of the pavement every 4 or 5 feet as we drive down the road. Oh, we can probably do that. We can report it. We can collect volumes and volumes of the data. But what exactly would I ever want to do with that data? We need to be able to figure out what critical elements of data are the ones that are being used by decision makers, and can we get that data to them? And can we get it to them in a timely, quality format? Standards development. I said that there are 50 different versions of trying to describe how pavements are good, fair, and poor, but wouldn't it be nice if there were some standards that if we're going to collect roughness, or if we're going to collect rutting, or if we're going to collect various components of the bridge, would it not make more sense that there be some series or some collaborative format, standards development to say this is how we should be doing it? We should be collecting the data this way, and then we need to be able to go through an analysis. Are we all analyzing the data the same way? Do I summarize a mile's worth of data by saying, well, the first 500 feet looks this way, so it's equivalent to the rest of the mile? Or do I say, no, this is the average for the mile that I've just collected the data? Do I look at every beam or girder on the bridge, or do I just say, well, we're going to check on the outside one on the left side every time, and it represents all of the girders or all the stringers or all the gussets or all of the bearings on the bridge? Do we need to look at it in an incremental element level data system? Some of the states, some of the vendors, some of the industry people have come back and said, you know, we ought to maybe think about certifying equipment. Does this equipment meet a certain standard? Does it meet a certain level of accuracy? What about the operators? Do we just routinely pick whoever was free today to drive the vehicle down the roadway? Is it repeatable data? Should there be something that says that this driver is certified to drive this particular piece of equipment? Can we make sure the Can we make sure the analysis is the same across the board? Some organizations use linear referencing systems in LRS. Others use long lat. Some of them use mileposts. Should we not be using the same concept of where is the system, where is the issue located? My direct experience on that, many years ago, working on a project on Skyline Drive out in Virginia, we were surveying a particular corner where there had been reported accidents. We're trying to check the slopes, cross slope. We're trying to figure out, was the ditch right? Was there water running on the road? We had it all laid out. We were trying to figure out how we were going to clear the right-of-way to make some changes out there, when one of the park police officers stopped by and checking in on us and wanted to know what we were working on. And we explained, well, we understand there have been a lot of accidents in this particular location, and we're trying to make some improvements. And he said, well, he'd been there for many, many years, and most of the accidents occurred about a mile down the road, not at this particular bend in the road. So without the right data, because we had been told, oh, you drive it and it's at this milepost. Well, that wasn't accurate enough. We needed to actually figure out where were we, and the park police had one series of references, and the engineering and maintenance shop had a different set of references. I bring that out not as being an exception to the rule, but I bet you that more places than not, that is fairly common, and we need to make sure it's all tied together. We need to look at the network. How are my highways doing? How are my bridges doing? We know enough about bridge A, B, or C, but I think the public and the legislatures want to know, How is the system? How is the network doing? That's what we can be more articulate about. On an annual basis, states will be held accountable for system performance. That's what the law requires. Major key to performance is quality, timely data. We're saying it time and time again. Quality, timely data. Missing or poor quality data may be held against the agency. If an agency says, we don't have time to collect that data, the rules, MAP 21, are pretty clear. If you don't collect the data and you don't report on the data, you could be penalized. But let's make sure that it's quality, timely data. We need to work with the pavement and bridge management specialists to identify key performance measures to ensure success. For many, many, many years, we've been looking at roughness or smoothness as a criteria to define how good or what's the quality of the roadway out there. It didn't say much about the life. You could probably do some analogy and say, well, it's getting older and older and older, so it's getting rougher and rougher and rougher, but a quick coat of paint out there can make it smooth and mask the problem. So are we collecting the right data? I don't know that we have yet. I think we are working on it. I think that we will continue to work on it. But you know, the bottom line is a lot of our pavements are really at the end of their service life, and there may be something that's masking that particular situation. We need to identify performance measures and indicators for various preservation treatments. We've got a lot of anecdotal information. Oh, we've done this chip seal, we've done this fog seal, we've done this thin lift overlay, and we do them every 2 years whether we need to or not because it's just a good way of doing it. Well, can we start collecting data that says a chip seal and a fog seal the surface from environmental deterioration, and for the most part in this state, in this climate, in this particular traffic pattern, it extends the life 2 to 3 years. And in this particular situation, it works 5 to 7 years. We don't have that quantifiable data to be able to articulate, to put it into the system to say, this is really an effective tool and we need to move forward. We need to assist senior managers in using data to help drive decisions. And over the years that I've been out there and talked to various state DOTs, municipal leaders, county engineers, they have the data, but they haven't been using it in a way that's really cost effective. They may be using 1 or 2 components in the database and not looking at all of the data. They may forget the fact that the pavement is actually, as I just said, 10, 12, 15, 20 years old. They may say, well, it looks pretty smooth. It's riding smooth. We don't have any complaints. We haven't had any potholes lately. But it really is very close to just totally being deteriorated, and the next quick fix isn't going to work. And then maybe we shouldn't be spending $50,000 out there this year. We need to be able to figure out, we need to block off this section of the road, and we're going to spend $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, or maybe $1 million to fix this road, to then renew it and to give it new life. We need to be able to have senior managers be able to talk about that and make that for decisions. Future activities, culverts, high mast lights, overhead signs. I hosted a meeting in Cheyenne, Wyoming several years ago. We talked about what were the critical ones. These were those that were listed. There were several others. But when we started really getting down to the nuts and bolts, which ones are going to stop the traffic flow? Which ones are going to stop the movement of goods and service? Which ones are going to stop you getting to school or work or to the hospital or to the airport? Which one of these is most critical? And maybe that's where we spend our resources. We need to look at cross-asset analysis. And by that I mean, are our pavements, maybe a particular section of the pavement, is in near excellent condition? Can we back off a little bit, maybe still do some minimal maintenance out there, but maybe we don't need to be resurfacing it every 2 years or 3 years. Maybe we can make that 5 and 7 years, save a little bit of money and use it for bridges, or maybe use some of the money for safety, or maybe use some of the money to update and upgrade the ITS system or fix a few overhead signs. So we need to be able to use the management system individually to look at an asset and figure out, can we optimize it? Can we use less money and then use that money on some other asset at the same time? That's the cross-asset analysis. A few states are starting that, but bear in mind it's usually pavement and bridges, then maybe safety, then maybe ITS, maybe it's the maintenance dollars. The last bullet on this one is another one that's close to my and dear to my heart, is adaptation of critical assets to climate change. We know the climate is changing. There's lots of debates on how it's changing, how fast it's changing, but the bottom line is it's changing. And along the coast, along the interior of the United States, along other places, we are either having more intense storms, more frequent storms. The tides are coming in combined with severe storms, and they're disrupting traffic flow along the coastline. What are we doing? Which assets, and it comes out of the asset management plan, which assets are critical to the movement of goods and services, people, the economy? Which assets are critical? And then we can back up and take a look and say, well, which of those critical assets is vulnerable to temperature change, to rising water, to more increased storms, to changes in the environment? Which ones are critical? Which ones are vulnerable to which particular activity? It narrows the scope down to a manageable amount of work, but I think that the Office of Environment and Planning from Federal Highway and others are trying to work this together. And back in April, down in Miami, we had an excellent workshop talking about adaptation, asset management, and climate change. Future activities, and I'm nearly done, and I'll take some questions after that. We need to have that outreach to the metropolitan planning groups and local transportation agencies. We need to keep it simple, pavement and bridges. I can't say that often enough or enough times at all, but pavement and bridges. That's where the major investments are. So keep it simple, maintain the assets in a state of good repair. And that good repair is still sort of a nebulous term that's being used differently by different organizations, but is it doing the job that was intended to do? Can I deliver my goods and products? Can I get to school? Can I get to work? Can I get to the airport? Can I get there without having to go through a detour? Is it in a state of good repair? Final thoughts? Have performance measures that guide your investment. What are you trying to do? Adopt a preservation-first strategy for your investment priorities. If we're going to build it, we need to have a plan to take care of it. We need to move away from waiting until it's done, waiting until it's deteriorated, waiting until it's at the end of its service life, to then come up with the money to fix it again. We need to have that preservation-first strategy. We need to adopt investment principles that are based on life cycle, whole life costing. What do I need to do to keep my car in good condition for the next 10 to 15 years? What do I have to do to keep this roadway, this 1 mile segment of the roadway, in a state of good repair for the next 10 to 15 years? Budget it, plan for it, put the money aside to say that next year I'm going to do this, following year I'm going to do this. You cannot, we cannot wait 10 to 15 years and then decide we're going to do something. If I waited 5 years to change the oil on my car, I've already done so much damage to the car that I've shortened its life considerably. I need to be monitoring the pavement and the bridges from day one. What's my plan? What's my investment strategy? I need to make data that's relevant. Don't just collect data because I can collect the data. I don't need to know the temperature of the pavement 24/7 every day of the week. I do need to know so that I know what the fluctuations in the pavement is, but I certainly wouldn't need to collect pavement temperature every 5 feet going down the road, other than I can show you that I could. And we need strong leadership. There needs to be those champions. It may be a champion out in the maintenance shop, maybe the champion of a new young engineer who just says, we need to take care of what we own. It may need to be a champion in the corporate office, in the chief engineer's office. It may be on the secretary's staff. We need to have a champion that's moving, changing the culture of that organization. So, a little bit of my philosophy over a 40-plus year career in highways and trying to move from being just purely a mucker in the geotechnical side to a designer to a program manager trying to figure out where all the dollars are coming and going to working on management systems to really champion asset management over the last 7 or 8 years. So Rob, that's where I'm at. We can take some questions, and I'll turn it over to you for the next round.
Fantastic. It was excellent, Butch. Appreciate that. Let me take the prerogative of the moderator and ask the first question. I would encourage others who have questions, simply type them in. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. But Butch, you talk about, if I talk to maintenance folks, and I have throughout the country, they'll say, well, if you saw what we were given by construction, we could have told you right away that there were going to be problems. And if you talk to planners, and they'll criticize either the planners or the designers or construction, but if you talk to planners and designers, they will say, well, we never hear anything from maintenance that we can incorporate into the designs. And if you talk to construction, they'll tell you that they're under such pressure to reduce costs that they feel like they have no choice in the construction phase other than to hand the problems off to maintenance. Can you give us a sense of how we stop that if we want to have a good life cycle process? How do we connect those players in the process so that we can solve some of the problems in the planning and design phase, address some of the issues pre-construction in the construction phase, and then make sure that there's good feedback back in the loop from our maintenance side?
Very good question, Rob. Excuse me, and it's interesting that when I was in construction, I had those very same comments and questions, and when I moved into the office, and the construction people would often call me saying, I thought we were going to have that discussion with the designers or the planners. I think that the concept of the asset management plan and an opportunity to have quantifiable data is an opportunity to showcase what those conditions are. Pretty much every state, local jurisdiction looks at the pavement on a cyclic basis, every 2-3 years probably. They look at every bridge on a biannual basis every 2 years, and they report back on it. What we need to be doing is articulating that change in the culture so that, excuse me, when I'm looking at the pavement data, that the decision makers in design and planning are also looking at the data. And as I may send it forward to them, I might highlight that there seems to be a deterioration going on out here. There seems to be something changing in the conditions of this particular pavement or this particular roadway. I'm convinced that we have the data. I'm convinced that we can articulate that data in many, many, many cases, but it has to be with that change in the corporate culture, philosophy in the front office. I remember in conversations with Carlos Becerras out in Utah several years ago, he said that a couple times a year he will sit down with the pavements people, go over all of the pavements, what their concerns are, what their issues are. He wanted to look at the data. He then had that same conversation with his district engineers saying, this is the data that we're getting from the pavements people. He would do the same type of a thing with the bridge. The bridge data was being collected by the bridge inventory, bridge condition group. He would look at their issues, their concerns, look at the data. He'd say, is it repeatable? Is it quantifiable? He would then talk to the bridge engineers and then the district engineers about it. And so you saw that the way that Utah was doing it was that there was that constant dialogue across the channels, across the data, across the various silos that were within the state DOT, and so that when certain bridges or certain pavements were brought into the TIP and STIP, the capital improvement program, you understood where they were coming from because it was the data that was driving those decisions. In other states, we just haven't seen that dialogue, and that's why I'm hoping that by putting together this framework of cross-cutting people within your agency and they start talking about the data that's out there, I do believe that we can break down some of those silos between maintenance and construction and planning, and then it'll come. It's not going to happen tomorrow, and we've seen that internationally. Asset management doesn't happen tomorrow, but they've been talking about cross-asset and moving the money around, trying to optimize the system for some time, and I really believe it's just being able to use that data that we've talked about, pavement data, bridge data, other data that's out there, being able to say the data is reliable, it's timely, it's not 5 years old, it's the data we got this week. So I like that. I think that I really am strongly in thinking that this pavement thing is going to make that all happen. So the asset management part will.
Who do you consider to be the best models right now from the state level? If I'm a bright young engineer and I'm starting my career and I get a chance to go work for any state agency right now, where should I start my career? And who do you think would be the best models that I could learn from and then go to take those lessons other places? So who are the ones that, from where you stand right now, are doing things that are leading the way over the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a tough question, a very good question. Certainly,
well, you're free to talk about them now that you're retired, you can kind of get away with that a little bit. But I mean,
well,
talk to those who are. Give them a sense of what's going on out there.
Well, I'm still hoping that I can travel through those states on some future date. But I'll tell you the ones that I personally thought were doing an outstanding job, and I would say that Utah is certainly one of those, and I blame it on their leadership. Their leadership has really just taken the ball and been an aggressive leader, trying to make it work. And even if you could just be a fly on the wall in that shop sometime. In a different vein, in a different way, looking at it in a corridor network level, I would say the North Carolina DOT is working on being very aggressive and moving the ball forward, maybe in a particular area of pavements, and they're trying to be cross-cutting to bring the bridges into the same fold, those types of efforts. Another state might be the state of Vermont and New Hampshire, the two states up north. They've taken a little bit different approach, but I love the idea that it's a corporate culture change that they're working on. It's being discussed in the front office every time. They are looking at bringing new young engineers in and saying that this is our culture. You're not coming here to necessarily build bridges. You're coming here to extend the life of those bridges. I would say that Oregon, the state of Oregon out in Salem, I think that they are, as another West Coast state, are working on the bridge side, are making tremendous contributions on the bridge side. They are collecting the data in a way that I think is very good. Some other newcomers, Colorado DOT, the Wyoming DOT, excuse me, A lot of them are doing pavements, a lot of them are doing bridges, but I'm thinking that this asset management is a cultural change, and we're trying to change the culture of that state DOT. Those states that I just rattled off, and Ohio might be another one, Michigan might be another one. Those Florida, Anand Fasat, the Secretary of the Florida DOT, changing the culture. They are making one of the corporate goals within the state to preserve those assets and to move those assets forward, extend their life. I'm sure I left out a half a dozen others, but there are some that are still in the old mindset of design and construction, that the money will come magically from someplace. They need to continue to build as they need to build, but they need to be able to adopt and to aggressively take on the concept of asset management. What assets do they own? What condition are they in? What do they want them to be doing? And what's the plan to get them there?
Well, Matt Haubrick asks, he said, you mentioned the need for data collection standards across the country. With the National Bridge Inspection Standards and the Sharp Pavement Distress Protocols, what are your thoughts on the next generation of data standards or standardization?
Well, excuse me, I've had several of the major vendors and some of the universities come and talk to me about data standards. There have been some, for pavements, there's been some data standards proposed, and there are some proposed AASHTO protocols for how to collect the data. I think the vendors are more than willing to do almost anything and everything, but they too would just like to say, is there some standardization? I know that there's the RPUG, the rutting and cracking user group that is taking a look at trying to do something like that to say, you know, this is practical data. Excuse me, most often the data is used at the project level. What we need to do is develop some standardization, some protocols for the network. I want to look at 1,000 miles of road and say, is that pavement in good, fair, and poor condition? And I know that there are some user groups, some groups put together by AASHTO, Federal Highway, some of the state DOTs that are trying to put that together, and I think that would be really good. We did that with the skid testing devices many years ago. We did it with falling weight deflectometers many years ago. I think we need to move forward in that arena. You know, we need to be able to figure out, is it a regionally based certification? Is it, you know, what are the protocols? You know, is every road in Maine the same as every road in Arizona? You know, how do we do that, and how can we make rhyme or reason out of that? I do know that, excuse me, Tom Van and some of the other people at Federal Highway are working on that. We just need to get on the bandwagon and help them get that done.
Brian Leschko would like to know if you could address deterioration modeling. Any thoughts as it relates to that?
Well, I think on the pavement side, there is a lot of that data out there. It's state by state by state. I don't think there's a standard one because of the climatic changes and the different types of materials. My time in the pavement side, in Iowa, North Carolina, a dozen other states, we found out that there is no one standard cross-section for the pavement. And so to say, is there a deterioration model for any one of those? No, there's probably not. But my gut feeling is the state actually has the data. They just need to quantify the data and start taking a look at it in a section-by-section basis. We've talked about the fact that there ought to be this segmentation of the pavement system, and not to say that we're looking at this 11-mile section of the roadway and then the next section is only a mile long and the next section is 5 miles long. That may be how we work on it, But in the meantime, we might want to be able to look at 1 mile long segments of the pavement and say, how is this particular piece of pavement performing? Earlier in the year, I went to North Dakota and South Dakota. Both of those states showed me documents, and we actually took a road tour and drove around parts of both of those states to look at the data they had collected. And they would say, in this segment of the roadway, this half mile, this 1 mile, this 2 mile segment, this is the history, this is how it's deteriorating, this is how it's functioning. In neighboring states, they had the data, but they did not have it broken down into the same formats that I saw in North and South Dakota. They've been doing it for a long time. They have really great deterioration models, and they've tried to be fairly consistent in the different cross sections of the pavement. But on a section of the roadway that we worked on in North Carolina most recently, 37-year-old concrete, but the outside lane had been milled and overlaid with asphalt 6 inches deep. The middle lane had been milled and overlaid with a new layer of concrete. And then the third inside lane was full depth asphalt. People are saying, well, should there just be a singular deterioration curve for all of that? Not likely. Not likely to ever happen. But I'm guessing that North Carolina probably has some pretty good data to say that our full depth asphalt in this particular situation, this is how it deteriorates, this is what we need to be doing. So on the pavement side, I think we have excellent potential. On the bridge side, the 23 metrics that the bridge people are now collecting, and we're looking at element level data, I think that they're going to get, over time, a much, much better handle. I think that California, in the past it used to be Oklahoma, Florida, Montana, and probably a handful of other states actually looked at all of the various elements and started looking at the deterioration and the asset management of various elements. So they are starting to have it, and I think that with time, as those super users start being heard more through the asset management program, that you're going to see people looking at the deterioration model on this type of a bridge, this type of an element on the bridge, this type of bearing, whatever it happens to be, and have a better asset management approach to all of their bridges. So it's out there. The data's out there. We just need to be able to use the data, and I think that'll move it forward.
Butch, one last question. There seems to be a trend, at least in some agencies, that from a budgeting standpoint, inspection, project inspection, is beginning to wane, if you will, that there's less and less of it, and I've heard some concerns that that's going to eventually begin to impact quality. Have you heard any of that? And if so, what are your thoughts as it relates to proper inspection of contractors, and projects?
Well, we have heard that over time, and pretty much in every forum, every presentation, every conference over the last couple of years. I think we're going through some growing pains of where we had all of that hands-on inspection by the state DOT or the city or the county consultants that were out there. We did far more of that, and now it's slowing down. We're also losing some of the quality people, the history, the culture of the agency, where you knew where to look, you knew what to look for, you knew which tires to kick, you knew which rock to look at. That's all been changing. Unfortunately, not all of our construction techniques have changed over the years, and so we're getting further away from it. And yes, there is a concern for quality. I think that, again, going back to suggesting timely data, and I don't mean to be a squeaky wheel talking about that, but I think that by looking at the data, looking at it consistently, we start to see trends. This section of the pavement is deteriorating faster than this section of the pavement. Well, maybe it has a little bit to do with the quality of that pavement. And so, good friend, Brian Colley with Federal Highway, has started putting on a series of webinars and seminars, mostly online. I think they're all documented by Federal Highway through YouTube webinars. But this is how you put down a quality tack coat. This is how you do quality pavements, asphalt. This is how you do quality concrete. We've worked with ACPA and NAPA to make sure that, they too are alarmed that the quality of the product isn't getting down, and then the focus is going to be back on them for not having quality products. We need to have better products out there all the time, and Brian and his staff have been working hard on this to be able to make sure that if you want to know how to put down a tack coat, or why you should put down a tack coat, or why you should put down this type of material, NAPA working on what type of surface treatment works best on this type of a product. We've been working with those senior leaders and those particular associations and those companies to try to make a difference out there. And I think that tries to fill that gap to make sure that we have quality products so that in the long run, performance, in the long run, our asset management can be able to better address those issues and to extend the life and get the best bang for the dollar. Thanks, Rob.
Well, Butch, let me just say in conclusion, one, we appreciate you for being the first in our Legends series, and secondly, for your service. 42 years is quite a career, and we're grateful for it. Hopefully this will be a webinar that young engineers will be able to look back on and get a sense of where we were at this key time with MAP 21 implementation coming forward. And hopefully we'll be able to drag you back a few times over the next few years to help us in certain areas. I am very intrigued by this idea of the environment and how we can use data to better understand how environmental conditions are shaping challenges for the future. So maybe we'll be able to do some things on that. But I hope retirement is kind to you, and that certainly that you'll have a chance to enjoy over the next few years all of the effort that you've put in. But I just wanted to say thank you.
If anyone has a follow-on question or an inquiry of one type or another, if they would send it to you, Rob, and you obviously can see my email address on the website, but send them through you or however, and if there's a particular interest or a question or somebody would like some additional information, please feel free to contact either one of us, okay?
All right, thank you very much. And with that, we'll end our webinar today.
Thank you.